Musical Hell is hitting the high seas next year. Check out the video information to find out how you can join me and the hit musical 6 on the Norwegian Bliss. This episode of Musical Hell is brought to you by Midnight Musicals. Welcome to the podcast Musical Underground. And by Cafe Himbo Cookbooks, celebrating his 10th anniversary. Thank you. Greetings, mortals. Welcome to another session of the Infernal Court in Musical Hell. I'm Diva, your judge, jury, executioner, and evil capitalist overlord. As fairy tales go, the Bremen town musicians doesn't tend to rank high in many popularity contests. To refresh your memory, a donkey, a dog, a cat, and a rooster all get thrown off their respective farms for outliving their usefulness and decide to team up and head to Bremen to start a new busking career. On the way, they find a den of robbers, scare the goat hide off them, and then live happily ever after in the abandoned hideout. Yeah, not exactly a page-turner. Even Jim Henson's attempt to make it interesting only half succeeded, so what chance did our next offender, the Fearless Four, have? The debut production of German studio Munich Animation, this obscure bit of weird was produced for distribution by Warner Brothers in 1997. Given that was the holiday season that saw Anastasia, Tomorrow Never Dies, 101 Dalmatians, and Titanic, among others, it's no wonder this one kind of got lost in the shuffle and pretty quickly went to the graveyard of forgotten DVDs, where, of course, yours truly unearthed it. So let's examine the case of the Fearless Four. The opening narration takes place over some pleasant pastoral backgrounds that evoke some of Ralph Bakshi's better moments, so maybe the aesthetics will be all over the place. Ooh, cover your mouth. Don't you know there's a pandemic on? Sin number one is how uneven the look of the movie is. Some of the backgrounds are beautiful, some are just kind of okay, and all of them don't gel with the Don Bluth-light characters, who never really feel like they're part of or interacting with the environment. This gets worse when you add in the CGI animation, which is, well, it's late 90s CGI animation. This scene is introducing us to the first of our titular quartet, a dog named Buster. Buster has been purchased as a hunting dog, but he's more of a singer than a fighter and would rather jam with the woodland animals.
I'm not grunge, not depressive at all.
And speaking of things that don't mesh together, the song styles aren't a good fit for the look of the movie, which is mostly pastoral with a slight tinge of steampunk. Anachronistic songs in animated movies tend to work best with more exaggerated aesthetics, whether for a single character or scene or for an entire film. This scene feels like they're trying to do Disney's Robin Hood in the Watership Down universe. Buster's new owner is incensed to find him romancing his intended quarry, so he rings up a guy who looks like he got lost on the way to auditions for the 60s Batman series. This is a representative of the Mixmax Corporation who has purchased Buster for stuffing and mounting purposes. Buster isn't down for that and makes a break for it.
I'll teach you to listen to me!
Oh, no, don't pull his tail!
We'll go with him. Where I love animals.
So yeah, pulling Buster's tail turns him into a terrifying superpowered beast. This is neither explained nor utilized much, but it's enough to get him to walk away from his captors with a little light electrocution as a parting shot. And a pee joke. Because of course. With Buster out of the way, we switch perspective to Fred the donkey, who is getting on in years and isn't up to hauling around the enormous loads of flour the miller who owns him piles onto his back. The miller also isn't too big on Fred singing the blues while he works, despite his being voiced by blues legend B.B. King, so he calls Mixmax and orders a mechanical replacement.
I'm not a sentimental fool. Get in the heat, I keep my cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure why the miller considers this a trade-up, especially in the music department. Also, you can just tell there was only so much they could do with the computer animation, and they're choreographing the entire song around those limitations. Fred is drop-kicked into the back of the delivery van to be carted away for carcass processing, but a friendly bee and his bee swarm stage a rescue. After Buster and Fred share their griefs and their love for music, they decide to team up and head to Paris to make a new start. Unfortunately, the road sign was knocked askew during the bee swarm rescue, and they mistakenly head down the path towards Bremen. So after...
Gwendolyn the cat had a wonderful life with her beloved Aunt Wanda.
We cut to the cat and her story. I'm going to discuss sin number 4, the overlong establishing sequence. It takes up nearly half the movie, and there's not much variation to it. Here's an animal, the humans in their life are terrible and hire Mix-Max to do terrible things, the animal escapes, there's maybe a song somewhere. It doesn't make for a very engaging story. Anyway, Gwendolyn the cat's tale is kind of an Aristocats meets Knives Out situation. Her beloved owner, Aunt Wanda, has passed away, and the Hitchcock caricature of an estate lawyer informs the greedy heirs that the terms of the will require them to look after Gwendolyn or lose the inheritance. They quickly realize that having her meet with an accident is the easiest solution, and recruit Mix-Max, which basically deals in all-purpose evil, to deal with her.
I got her!
So Gwendolyn escapes with her loot and heads for a lonely bridge, where Buster and Fred find her singing a heartbroken ballad.
Now I find myself out on a limb, without a friend, the future looks grim.
Despite Buster's radical ailurophobia, Fred invites Gwendolyn to join the team, and we go to check in on the rooster, Tortellini. He does switch things up slightly by being partially responsible for his predicament, as he's a deadbeat husband who gets himself kicked out of the coop. But because this movie has a well-established pattern, he doesn't get far before he and the rest of the flock are rounded up by Mix-Max for nuggets. But a low-hanging limb knocks him off the delivery truck and right into the path of the other 3 animals.
All the chicks were hot for me. And if it hadn't been for an affair with a lovesick duck, I tell you... Oh, well, never mind.
Oh, please.
What a show-off.
Yeah, Tortellini is kind of a dick and the others are clearly not impressed with him, but this movie isn't called The Fearless 3, so he joins the crew, and they head on their merry way with some generic R&B for the road. Their path takes them to a dark, spooky forest, where they encounter a suitably dark, spooky owl.
We're musicians, and we're headed for Paris.
Paris? You want to go to Paris? But Paris is in the opposite direction.
Who talks like Nadia of Antipaxos for some reason. Adding to the old Romani woman in a Hammer horror vibe, she tells the 4 that they're on the path to Bremen and going there is a sure recipe for early death.
That city is under a spell, and only a monster can break it. A monster with 8 eyes and 14 legs.
But all her warnings go unheeded, so the owl guides them to the outskirts of Bremen. The narrator pops in to explain that Bremen is under the thumb of the Mix-Max Corporation and its obviously evil CEO with the obviously evil name of Dr. Greed. Singing and laughter are forbidden in the city, which you think would be the first thing the creepy owl would have mentioned to dissuade the aspiring musicians from going there, but no matter. They set up on a corner and quickly attract an appreciative audience with their generic friendship and solidarity lyrics.
This is both love and friendship we share. I found a shoulder to lean on. A friend's always there.
Among the admiring crowd is a mouse in a powdered wig, which IMDb tells me is named Mozart, but for reasons which will be abundantly clear, we shall dub Deus Ex Machina. Also attracted by the performance is Platini, Mix-Max's slightly less obviously evil VP. Seeing how popular the singing animal act is, Platini decides against arresting them and instead offers them a gig in advertising. Tortellini, whose only character trait is that he's awful, declares himself the leader of the group and immediately accepts, and Platini goes to deliver the good news to Dr. Greed.
Nobody would dare accuse us of being against animals again. They'll be in the office tomorrow.
Well, just make sure everything goes as planned.
Oh, and bring me the broom of the Witch of the West and pay no attention to the man behind the curtain and all that. Gwendolyn, as keeper of the group's single brain cell, has some misgivings about the standard issue restrictive fame and fortune in exchange for your soul contract boilerplate, but Tortellini overrules her objections and they sign on the dotted line, then head home to dream about what they're going to do with all their money.
I'll get myself an opera house and produce an opera.
A brief montage chronicles the Fearless Four's rise to the top of the commercial jingle circuit, which is all the time it takes for them to get tired of singing the official Mix-Max song and have a whole bunch of other second thoughts about the whole situation and go to Platini with their grievances.
You'll hear from my lawyer.
And what exactly does Mix-Max stand for? Who's Mix?
And who's Max?
Why don't you admit we're talking about sausages here?
Gwen, honey, you're the obligate carnivore of the group. I'm not sure you're the best one to raise this issue. But more importantly, we're 45 minutes into this movie, and I don't know much more about these characters than when I started. Tortellini has the most distinct personality, that personality being asshole, and I guess Gwendolyn is supposed to be the moral compass of the group, but Buster and Fred barely register. We're told they're bored and exhausted with their new gig, but we never really see that happening. There's very little about these characters and their relationships, either in concord or conflict, that makes them interesting. What makes them stick together? How are they being tested, both individually and as a group? Who knows, and more importantly...
Chairs!
Platini tells them to shut up and do as they're told, and an attempt at rebellion by singing satirical lyrics only ends in the four getting dragged out of the studio and imprisoned, where for reasons that are never made clear, Fred is singled out for torture.
Huh? Oh, wait,
What?
Everything looks hopeless, so guess what? It's time for Deus Ex Machina to make his way back into the story.
Are you ready for my music now? Come on, this way.
Using Buster's superpowered berserk side and some handy rope, the heroes climb out of their prison and onto the compound roof, where they're able to pass by Dr. Greed's office and hear his villain exposition.
Here is the model of the most sophisticated computer-driven sausage machine ever invented. It will produce 12,000 sausages an hour.
They also find the grim holding cells where the future ingredients of Mix-Max's sausages are held, which apparently includes dogs and cats? Okay, I get what this movie is trying to say about animal abuse and cruelty, but there are a lot of issues with the execution. To begin with, it equates cruelty to animals with eating them. There are many more facets to the problem than that, and with 4 separate animal species, there's certainly room to explore them, and it is possible, although rare, for animals raised for meat to be treated humanely. Second, why does Mix-Max feel they need to use unorthodox animals for their product? It's certainly not necessary to convey their obvious evilness or to spur the heroes to act against them. There are plenty of excellent stories about animals looking to avoid the dinner table. There's no reason to go to such ridiculous lengths to make your point. Deus Ex Machina points the way to the exit, which happens to be through the new super evil sausage-making machine, which could be promising with a lot of action and dodging dangerous equipment and...
Don't worry. Remember, the knives are missing.
Or it could just make me want to turn this whole thing off and watch Chicken Run instead. Everyone gets out, except Tortellini loses all his feathers in the process and also needs to go back for his manscaping kit, and he has to resort to desperate measures to escape. So now that the 4 are free, they need to find a way to rescue all the poor animals slated for the grinder. Gwendolyn, still in charge of the team brain cell, suggests they topple Mix-Max from the inside by going back under the guise of repentance. And apparently in the original German cut, this involved her pulling a Jessica Rabbit routine with Platini, so for once let's be thankful for rigid American Puritanism. At any rate, the bad guys are happy to have their spokes animals back in time for Dr. Greed's election party, because, by the way, he's running for office, but to ensure good behavior, they send Dr. Greed's snake, by the way, he has a snake, into the orchestra pit with a machine gun to prevent any shenanigans.
Don't worry, I'll handle it.
Yes, it's Deus Ex Machina to the rescue once again! Honestly, he's the real hero of the movie. Thanks to his snake charming, the Fearless Four are able to perform a protest anthem which inspires the audience to riot against its corporate masters.
Why is there always someone who brings eggs and tomatoes to a speech?
But a stagehand points out that the bad guys aren't going to go down that easy, so to try and tie this back into the original fairy tale, the four decide to go into some scare tactics. Pro tip: frightening evil capitalists into submission only works on Christmas Eve, and even then it's tricky. The villains end up dropped down their own overly complicated henchman disposal unit, the Mix-Max complex, and maybe the entire town blows up, and everyone goes back to Gwendolyn's old house, where the evil heirs have conveniently vanished and the estate is free to become an animal sanctuary.
Don't you worry about a thing, baby, close your eyes, I'll take care of you.
And the dog and the cat sing a love song despite having no real relationship throughout the entire movie. Because sure, why not? It's kind of fitting that the villains of the Fearless Four produce sausage, because that's what this movie feels like. Assorted bits ground up and mixed together to create the finished product. Only not as tasty. It's a melange of ideas and characters that never seem to fit well together in a half-hearted presentation, so the Court of Musical Hell condemns those involved to a diet of the worst recipes from 1950s cookbooks. So let it be recorded. This session of the Infernal Court in Musical Hell is now adjourned.